Hey everyone, welcome back to another deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a close look at this article you sent over emotion dysregulation or alexithymia, reinterpreting childhood behavioral symptoms in ADHD and autism.
Yeah, really interesting stuff.
It is. This deep dive is going to be all about alexithymia and how it might be impacting the way some kids with ADHD and autism regulate their emotions.
Absolutely.
I think this is going to be really insightful, especially if you're interested in, all the different ways people experience and manage their emotions. We're really lucky to have an expert with us today to help break it all down.
It's fascinating how this article really challenges some common assumptions. Like it
Mm.
really encourages us to look beyond just the surface behaviors we see.
Absolutely. Right off the bat, the article highlights the study from the University of Edinburgh.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that.
Yeah, they looked at emotion regulation in kids between 3 and 7 years old. And one of the things that really stood out to me was they found that kids who didn't improve in their emotional regulation as quickly as their peers were more likely to have ADHD, internalizing problems, and even some behavioral issues by the time they reached 7.
Yeah. And what's really crucial here is the focus on those early years, right? That early childhood period is so important for emotional development. And, this study just highlights how important it is to identify any potential markers early on so that we can intervene and offer support as needed.
Yeah, for sure. It really makes you wonder why do some kids improve more quickly than others? What's happening differently for them?
Well, that's where alexithymia comes into
Mhm.
play. The article does a really, really good job of explaining what it's like to live with alexithymia.
Yeah.
It's almost like your emotions are kind of, they're hidden or inaccessible,
Yeah.
making it difficult for someone to understand, identify, and even describe what they're feeling.
Yeah. I can imagine how frustrating that could be. So it's not that people with alexithymia don't have emotions, right?
Exactly. It's not that they don't have emotions. It's just that they really struggle to sort of navigate and understand them. Like, imagine trying to read a book in a language you don't understand, right?
Okay, yeah.
Like, you can see the words, but you have no idea what they mean. It's kind of like that.
Right.
They feel something, like a surge of something, but they struggle to pinpoint if it's sadness or anger or even excitement.
Wow.
And sometimes they might even mistake someone else's emotion for their own.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Now, the article talks about Jaime Hoerricks, the author, who actually lives with both alexithymia and hyperempathy.
Oh, yeah.
And wow, what a combination.
Yeah, can you imagine? You're incredibly sensitive to everyone else's emotions, but you struggle so much to understand your own. It's like trying to follow a conversation in a crowded room where everyone's speaking a different language, and at the same time, you're also super overwhelmed by all the noise.
That's a really great analogy. Now, the article mentions that alexithymia is actually more common in autistic and ADHD individuals, but they make it clear that it's not a given.
Right. Yeah, that's a very important distinction. It helps explain why there's so much variation in how individuals with these diagnoses experience and regulate their emotions. It's not always just about the ADHD or the autism diagnosis. It's about recognizing that alexithymia could be a distinct and separate factor.
So are we saying that, in a way, alexithymia could actually be a contributing factor to the emotional dysregulation we see in some kids with ADHD and autism?
Exactly. If you have difficulty identifying your own emotions, it becomes that much more difficult to manage them.
Right.
Think about it. Like, how can you calm yourself down if you don't even know why you're feeling upset in the first place?
Right. It's like their emotions are bottled up and they have no way to sort of release the pressure because they can't even identify what the pressure is. Precisely. And it's so important to understand that this kind of dysregulation, stemming from alexithymia, it's different from other forms of dysregulation. We're not simply talking about impulsivity or even just external pressures. We're talking about a very fundamental difficulty in recognizing and understanding one's own internal emotional state.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's think back to that study we were talking about from Edinburgh.
Yeah.
How does this whole idea of alexithymia play into why some kids with ADHD and autism, are maybe on a slower trajectory when it comes to being able to regulate their emotions?
Well, it could be that for those children, they're facing a different set of challenges right from the beginning. If they're having trouble identifying their emotions in the first place, they're already kind of, starting a few steps behind.
Ah, okay. So then I'm also thinking that could lead to some of their behaviors being misunderstood too. Oh, absolutely. For example, think about a child who's really frustrated, but can't quite grasp what that feeling is,
Mm-hmm.
They might end up having these outbursts,
Yeah.
That could be seen as typical ADHD impulsivity.
Mm.
But in reality, it's coming from this inability to recognize and process their frustration.
That makes sense. What about a child who's experiencing sensory overload but just they can't figure out what's happening?
Right.
So their reactions might look like classic autistic sensory processing difficulties, but maybe it's more that they just don't have that emotional awareness.
Exactly. It's like the alexithymia is almost acting like a disguise,
Mm.
masking or even amplifying the core features of their diagnosis. And that's why recognizing alexithymia is so important because, without it, we're kind of missing a big piece of the puzzle when we're trying to figure out how to support these kids.
Right, because we're not addressing the root of the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, the article did mention that not every child with ADHD or autism has alexithymia.
Right. It's not, a universal experience,
Mhm.
which explains why there is such a range of emotional regulation skills
Mm.
within these groups.
Yeah.
Some kids might have a great understanding of their emotions
Mm.
and be able to demonstrate really, strong resilience.
But then others might really struggle because of the alexithymia.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to another important point the article raises, the impact of gender.
Ah, okay.
Alexithymia and neurodivergence are often underrecognized in girls.
Because of that old stereotype. Boys tend to externalize their challenges, and so they are more likely to get diagnosed with ADHD or autism.
Right. Whereas girls are often more likely to internalize their struggles,
Right.
which makes it more difficult to pick up on.
Okay, yeah, I see.
And when it comes to alexithymia, they might not display the same, outbursts that are often associated with emotional dysregulation.
Ah, interesting. So their challenges might be harder to spot because they don't fit that sort of, typical picture that we have in our minds.
Yeah.
And then that leads to delays in diagnosis or even misdiagnosis.
Exactly.
It seems like this all comes back to needing a more nuanced understanding of these conditions and how they might show up differently in different individuals.
Absolutely.
So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about the practical side of things.
Okay. Yeah.
So what does it mean for actually supporting these kids if we know that alexithymia might be a factor?
Well, the article really highlights the importance of screening for alexithymia.
Okay.
Early identification is key because it allows for a more targeted approach.
Because I'm guessing those generic emotion regulation strategies, like the ones that might work for some kids, aren't going to be as effective for a child who's dealing with alexithymia.
Right. Teaching a child to, take deep breaths or count to 10
Mhm.
isn't going to be very helpful if they can't even figure out what's making them feel overwhelmed in the first place.
So what sorts of interventions would be more helpful? Like, what should we be doing?
We need to focus on interventions that really help these kids build emotional awareness from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Helping them connect those physical sensations they experience to specific emotional states.
Okay, yeah.
Like, that racing heart, that tightness in their chest.
Okay, so it's kind of like we're teaching them the vocabulary of emotions.
Exactly. So they can start to make sense of their own internal world. And it's not just about the child.
Oh, right. Okay.
The article also talks about how important caregiver education is. Parents, teachers, anyone who interacts with these kids needs to have an understanding of what alexithymia is and how it might be influencing their behavior.
Because otherwise those behaviors could be completely misinterpreted, right?
Right.
Seen as the child being difficult or uncooperative or maybe overly sensitive.
Yeah, and that's only going to lead to more frustration for everyone involved.
Right. So it sounds like creating a supportive environment is really key here.
Oh, absolutely.
An environment where the child feels safe to explore and express those emotions without fear of judgment.
Yeah, and an environment that minimizes sensory and emotional overload.
Okay.
Which we know can make it even harder to process these internal experiences.
Right. Wow, it really sounds like recognizing alexithymia is so important,
Yeah.
for understanding just how complicated emotional dysregulation can be, especially for kids who are, neurodivergent.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it really emphasizes the need for us to look beyond the surface, and consider how differently people might experience and process their emotions.
For sure. This whole deep dive, it's really been eye-opening for me. Like, I've learned so much.
Me too.
And I hope you're finding it insightful too. One thing that really stuck with me is how much the article emphasized the need for more research.
Yeah, totally. We really need studies that specifically look at alexithymia alongside emotional dysregulation to understand how they work together, how they interact.
Because, I mean, the more we understand about that relationship, the more we'll be able to develop, really effective and personalized interventions, right?
Exactly. That way we can ensure that all children, no matter their challenges, get the support they need, to thrive.
It's interesting because to me, this article, it's not just about alexithymia. It's about, sort of taking a step back and challenging how we think about and understand neurodiversity in general.
Absolutely.
I mean, if just recognizing alexithymia can have such a big impact on how we approach things, the supports we put in place,
Right.
it makes you wonder, what other things might we be missing?
Totally. What other hidden factors are out there that could be influencing how we think about how we interact with neurodiversity?
It's like we need to always keep learning, keep exploring, keep questioning our own assumptions.
Yeah, I mean, the more we learn about, the human experience and how complex it really is, the better we can create a world that really celebrates neurodiversity.
This has been such a great deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much. If you want to learn more about alexithymia, we'll include some resources in the show notes for you.
Yeah, and remember, knowledge is, it's most powerful when we share it. So think about what we talked about today and how it might, change how you see things, how you understand the people around you.
Such a good point. We can all play a part in creating a more inclusive world. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.